I'm doing a project in school called an inquiry project where we are supposed to do research on one topic, and I picked global warming because outside in the day right now we are experiencing it with a global temperature rise, and in Miami Beach, there the streets have water in it. So first question is what is global warming?
Yeah, so global warming is, I mean, it's kind of as the name sounds like it is a global temperature increase that we've been seeing um, progressively over the last couple centuries, essentially, especially since the Industrial Revolution. Um, it's been brought upon in large part by our burning of fossil fuels for electricity. So when you plug something into the outlet, that electricity has to come in a lot of cases it comes from burning coal or burning natural gas. When things like that are burned, or even when you drive, you're burning gasoline to power your car. When any of those things are burned or consumed, it gives off these gases that we call greenhouse gases, and essentially those go up into the atmosphere around the Earth. They allow more heat to be trapped in the planet, and that increase in heat has a lot of different repercussions or consequences. The sort of sea level rise or flooding in kind of coastal areas like Miami, which you mentioned, is definitely a big one. That's something we're dealing with right here in New Jersey as well. We have more than 100 miles of coastline along the Jersey Shore, and we're seeing the sea level is rising. We're seeing more flooding around that. But yeah, I don't want to get too ahead of myself.
So how are global warming and climate change related?
Yeah, that's a really great question. Global warming and climate change are often used as interchangeable kind of terms, and for the most part, they do essentially refer to the same thing. Global warming is kind of like I said, it's just a global temperature increase. Climate change is used, so that's really kind of referring a little bit more toward the cause. Climate change refers a little bit more towards the effect almost that we see. So the effect of that global temperature increase is essentially the change in the climate. In terms of sort of picking or choosing which phrase to use, that's something that really interests me as kind of someone who's really interested in the communications of science and communication of things like issues like global warming or climate change. Climate change really just can refer to any abnormal behavior in the climate. That can be both, warmer summers, something like global warming would imply. It can also be something like colder and rainier or snowier winters. Something like all the snow that we've seen up in Boston. Boston got about 7 feet of snow this winter. Crazy. It doesn't seem to be really intuitive. It doesn't make sense right away that global warming would cause more snow, but the rising sea levels and the warming seas actually make for these stronger winter storms too, which can lead to effects like snow. And that's kind of some of the differences in the use of the two terms.
So how much should we worry about the impact of global warming?
Not to sound like a pessimist, but we should worry a lot. It's definitely, I think, one of the biggest problems or challenges facing our society. It's definitely the biggest environmental challenge facing our society, in my opinion. It's something that we need to act really quickly on in order to counter the worst effects of global warming or make sure those things don't happen. A lot of people kind of talk about global warming and like, oh, this will affect our children or our children's children. And even though a lot of those worst effects, people say like, oh no, I mean, Miami could be underwater in 100 or 200 years. Even though a lot of the worst effects of global warming are far in the future, in order to prevent those from happening, we really need to act right now.
So what are the most simplest and easiest solutions that we can use to solve global warming?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I think the best answer is that really each individual does have a lot that they can do. Um, Things like just kind of being energy efficient. So if you have, really old appliances like an old air conditioner, an old refrigerator, those things often use way more electricity than their newer kind of counterparts. So getting a new refrigerator, a new air conditioner, just that's going to be more energy efficient. Things like just turning the lights off. I mean, it sounds small and simplistic and kind of silly to think that something so small can actually have a big effect. But if everyone on the planet were a lot more responsible with something like that, then it would actually have a big effect. It's kind of like, the drop in the bucket. One drop doesn't do much, but once you start getting enough, it can fill the bucket. And my role within Environment New Jersey is kind of as an advocate. It's really to call upon the state to implement policies, so like law, that will improve, our responses to global warming or help us fight this. So things like just, promoting clean energy wherever you can. If you have a house, if you have the means, putting solar on your roof, that's actually what most of my work is. It's in solar energy. So things like that can be really big. Buying a hybrid car, things like that.
Okay, so what do you think about how Miami Beach is using to solve climate change? So the way they're solving it is they're dewatering the water that's coming in and filtrating the water, making it fresh water.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I actually hadn't heard that, but that's a great example of a city taking a problem and actually turning it into a bit of a solution. So to sort of doing a 180. I think that's really great. I mean, in the short term, they do have this problem of increased flooding. To be able to use that and transform that into a usable product, which is fresh water, that's huge. I think in the long term, they'll need to do more to prepare for increasingly worse and worse flooding. But in the short term, I think that's a great solution.
So, what do you think about the Antarctica's glaciers that are melting?
Yeah, I mean that's a huge problem, and I think that's one of the big challenges of global warming, sort of from like a public policy or like a law perspective, is that you have this global problem that each country is contributing to in some way. The United States burns a lot of fossil fuels, we consume a lot of energy, and that's leading to, in part, to the Antarctic glacier melting. But no one country is totally responsible, so it's really difficult to make all of the countries realize that unless all of them take some degree of action, this big problem is going to continue to happen. If we lose those glaciers, it's going to have huge effects on sea level rise. We're going to see coastal flooding. We're going to see billions of dollars of damage on coastal cities like Miami, like New York, like cities across the world. And it's going to be really, really difficult to get to a point where we can start reforming that ice and re-stabilizing our atmosphere. I think it's kind of a scary thing, but if every country can sort of band together, like we saw, even the United States and China, the two biggest polluters or the two biggest emitters in the world, coming together just a few months ago and pledging to cut their greenhouse gas emissions. More actions like that, I think, can help to prevent continued loss of glaciers in Antarctica and elsewhere.
Also, one day I was watching a TV show about global warming, and it says that 97% of the research done say that global warming is happening, but on the political side, it says that global warming is not real for many of the Republicans.
Yeah, that's an unfortunate truth. That's a really great point. I think part of the challenge is sort of in the way the media, like news organizations, portray it as an active debate. They'll often have a scientist versus someone like an economist who really doesn't have a background, but it is the media's job to sort of present something as if there is this debate or there is this controversy. So in reality, even though 97% of people who really have that understanding of it, who are the climate scientists, agree that this is it's a human-caused problem, it's a big problem, and only 3% disagree, the media often depicts it as this 50-50 kind of instance, which is just not true. And I think part of our job as people who recognize that this is such a big problem is helping people understand that, yeah, just because there's one person arguing yes and one person arguing no on the news doesn't mean that they sort of have equal weight. And especially, I think, from kind of a risk-reward standpoint, even if in some crazy instance that 3% that doesn't think it's as big of a problem turned out to be right, we can't take the risk of siding with that 3% when there is so much at stake. Like I said, I mean, billions, trillions of dollars in damage to coastal cities. We're going to see, huge amounts of population having to be essentially climate refugees, moving from their homes because those homes have been taken over by rising seas. More people suffering like they did in New Jersey in the fall of 2012 from more extreme storms. We can't take the risk of not doing everything we can to try to counter this.
So I want to take the initiative to help raise awareness of this issue. What sort of ideas do you have so that I can get a good start?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. I think starting in kind of community places is a great way to do this. So in whatever community you belong to, whether it's your school, whether it's a sports league, whether it's a church or a place of worship, I think just encouraging the people there to take some action is a huge first step. So if it's a matter of at your school replacing old and efficient light bulbs with new LED light bulbs or something like that, whether it's or calling upon your church or your temple to install solar panels on the roof. Things like that, just really showing that it is a priority not just for you, but for the communities that you belong to, I think is a way to really grow the effect that one person can have.
Well, I'm also in my environmental club at my school, and also I'm starting to think about making a blog. So
That's awesome.
how well do you think that will do?
I think it's a great idea. I think, one of the realities that we're dealing with is a lot of the people who are on the political end who are kind of denying that climate change or global warming is a big problem are oftentimes much older and they don't quite have as much at stake as someone who's 11, who has a lot of years in front of him on this planet and who's going to see continued changes in the climate. And who has sort of a fresher perspective on this. So I think the more our elected officials hear from young people saying, listen, this is a terrifying problem. You need to do something about this because you're in a position to, because you have more power than me right now, I think that can make a huge difference.
So how do plastic bags really affect the way we live?
Ooh, God, that's a great question. I don't have too many statistics on that, but definitely, I mean, everything to create, a finished plastic product, you need fossil fuels to do it. Plastics are typically fossil fuel based, so you are extracting fossil fuels from the ground and burning them or consuming them in some manner to produce these. So the manufacturing process of plastic bags is definitely energy intensive. And then just, I think from a consumer standpoint, it makes us less inclined to just think about the impact we have on the planet around us when we are so accustomed to just using something once and just throwing it away, or using something once and having it rip and not even be usable anymore. So I think from an individual kind of perspective, a switch that can be as simple as going from plastic bags to reusable shopping bags can really make us think a lot more about if I'm doing that, why don't I try to be more efficient in other aspects of my life too?
So what do you think about how we are going to reduce our landfills? So if we have climate change happen and rising sea levels, and to make more room for other people?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's a couple different answers that you can kind of give, and one is about using the landfills that we currently have that are just a reality that we're dealing with, using them productively. And actually in New Jersey, there's just been the case in a couple landfills. The utility PSE&G is building solar arrays on top of them, so these big solar farms on otherwise totally unusable land. So it's taking something that's kind of an eyesore and an environmental problem and turning it into almost a benefit. And then the other big thing is really just trying to produce less waste. And I think that goes back to what we were kind of just talking about, which is having everyone really be more aware of their small but still significant contribution to kind of the larger environment around them, making each person realize, the end results of the waste that they produce. There's a lot of different ways that we can also kind of, from a manufacturing standpoint, try to produce less waste. In things like food production, there's a lot of waste that comes from that, trying to just make better packaging, more recyclable packaging, or just get rid of packaging where it's not really necessary, or just some kind of good examples.
That's all I have.
That's all? Well, awesome.
Thank you for your time.
Of course. I hope this was helpful. This is a great project. I'm so happy with this.